That's good. So have you guys ever ridden on a horse?
Nope.
Bless you.
That's the translation for that sneeze is no.
Oh, okay. Either have I. So, anyway, let me tell you about the first time a boy named Steve rode a horse. He was about 11 years old when his big sister Donna asked their mom and dad to take her riding. They said something big sisters always hate to hear. Sure, as long as you take your little brother with you. Yeah. She wasn't too thrilled about that. So they piled into the car and drove out to the stables where the man saddled up horses for Steve and Donna. Then off they went down the trail that led into the woods. Clip, clop, clip, clop. Steve thought he was a real cowboy. He was looking for outlaws behind every tree. Then they came to a place where there was a side trail off the main trail. Donna wanted to explore it, so she headed off that way. Unfortunately, Steve's horse didn't want to go that way. He wanted to stay on the main trail. Steve pulled hard on the reins. The horse just shook his head. Steve kicked his heels. The horse just shook his head. By then, Donna was getting really angry. She got off her horse and tried to pull Steve's horse up the trail. The horse just stood there. Well, they finally gave up and stayed on the main trail. That was one stubborn horse. But you know what? We can learn something from that horse. He was determined to stay on the main trail. He was determined not to get sidetracked by anyone or anything. And as Christians, we should be just as determined not to get sidetracked. The Bible says it best. Deuteronomy 5:32 says, "So be careful to do what the Lord your God commanded you. Do not turn aside to the right or to the left. Walk in all the ways that the Lord your God commanded you." We need to stay on track, obeying God, and not let anyone or anything get us to do something we shouldn't do. We need to be determined to stay on God's path no matter what. That's something we should pray about. So, Heavenly Father, help us to remember to keep doing all that you have commanded. Whenever we're tempted to go a different way, help us to always stay on your path. We ask this in Jesus' holy name. Amen.
Now Bonnie's going to read to us from the Gospel of Luke, all about the prodigal son. And I've got the mic. So where is it?
Jesus said, "A certain man had 2 sons. The younger son said to the father, 'Father, give me my share of the inheritance.' Then the father divided his estate between them. Soon afterward, the younger son gathered everything together and took a trip to a land far away. There, he wasted his wealth through extravagant living. When he had used up his resources, a severe food shortage arose in that country, and he began to be in need. He hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. He longed to eat his fill from what the pigs ate, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired hands have more than enough food, but I'm starving to death? I will get up and go to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. Take me on as one of your hired hands.' So he got up and went to his father. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was moved with compassion. His father ran to him, hugged him, and kissed him. Then his son said, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quickly, bring out the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Fetch the fattened calf and slaughter it. We must celebrate with feasting, because this son of mine was dead and has come back to life. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his older son was in the field. Coming in from the field, he approached the house and heard music and dancing. He called one of the servants and asked what was going on. The The servant replied, "Your brother has arrived, and your father has slaughtered the fattened calf, because he received his son back safe and sound." Then the older son was furious and didn't want to enter in, but his father came out and begged him. He answered his father, "Look, I've served you all these years, and I never disobeyed your instruction. Yet you've never given me as much as a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends." But when his son of yours returned, after gobbling up your estate on prostitutes, you slaughtered the fattened calf for him. Then his father said, "Son, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found." So ends the reading of God's holy word.
Thank you, Bonnie. Well, today is the first Sunday of Lent, the season that is leading us up to Easter. To introduce us to what Lent is all about, I'm relying on my old friend Chuck. I've had Chuck here before to explain what Lent is.
You ever hear of Lent? No, not lint. Lent. Lint you find in your belly button. What we don't say? Belly button. Sorry. Never mind. We are talking about Lent, not lint. On this episode, not episode, of Chuck Knows Church. Lent is observed in the liturgical year for approximately 6 weeks, considered a time of preparation leading up to Easter. Is this awkward for anyone else? I think we're good. Thank you. In most Western Protestant churches, Sundays are not counted as part of Lent. So the time from Ash Wednesday until Easter is 40 days, when Sundays are excluded. This is to recognize the 40 days that Jesus spent fasting in the desert, where he endured temptations before beginning his public ministry. Now, as we said, Lent is a time to prepare for Easter. In fact, the church focuses on increasing spiritual disciplines such as prayer and repentance, or self-denial, like giving up sweets or fatty foods, or the mispronunciation of words like Lent. All this provides an example to those preparing to live out the covenant of baptism. Now that's why Lent can also be a time to take on something, a chance to improve yourself, grow spiritually, work on relational or bodily fitness, learn to juggle. Whatever it is you choose to do or not do, it's about enhancing the discipline of the whole body for conversion from sin and death to love and life in Jesus Christ. Now, my favorite part is right before Lent on Shrove Tuesday, aka Fat Tuesday, the day before Ash Wednesday, and right after No Interesting Nickname Monday. Fat Tuesday is where we eat up all the good food in the house to prepare for the fasting season of the 40 days of Lent, which always translates to a pancake breakfast at our church. There we go. Can I get a fork? Someone? Anyone? A fork?
We already did the
No.
Shrove Tuesday episode.
Okay, did you ever hear of seconds?
So Lent is a time to prepare for Easter. And although we hear more about what we should be giving up for Lent, Chuck also points out that this is a time to take on something new, to improve yourself, to grow spiritually. It is in this context that this season of Lent, the Ark United Methodist Church is taking on the subject of stewardship, in an effort to help you grow spiritually. At the end of the sermon series, which will end on Palm Sunday, you don't believe that giving is really all about you, then we failed. We didn't do something right. Stewardship Sunday will end on Sunday, April 6th, with a celebration Sunday. Just 1 week before we observe Jesus' triumphant entry into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday and the beginning of Holy Week. Today we are focused on some of the more practical and analytical concepts of money. The story from the scripture this morning was the story commonly referred to as the story of the prodigal son. Now, before this morning, how many of you have heard of the prodigal son? I think you know most everybody, right? Do you know what the word prodigal means? Right? It's similar to the word stewardship in that you don't really hear it outside of church, ever. It's not, prodigal doesn't really creep into our everyday conversations, our daily speech much. So what do you think it means? Anybody want to be bold enough to step out there and say, I think it means this? And no, you can't tell. Wayward? Lost? Oftentimes you hear lost. Steward? No, it's not actually steward. It's the opposite of. What's the opposite of steward, right? So prodigal is defined as carelessly and foolishly spending money. Carelessly and foolishly spending money. It refers to the son, right, who was given everything by his father, his entire inheritance, right? And then foolishly spent it all on, my Bible says, wild living. Right? Later in the text, and we heard Bonnie read later in the text, they even use the word prostitute. So you get this picture of what this guy was doing, right? Now the story is really part of a trilogy of parables. Jesus is telling in Luke chapter 15. The three parables is the parable of the lost coin and the parable of the lost son, or the parable of the prodigal son. Right? Do you get the theme that's going in what Jesus is talking about? All has to do with being lost. Right? The three stories are about recovering what was lost. Now for some context. Right? The beginning of chapter 15. Chapter 15 verses 1 and 2 reads, Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathered around to hear him. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, This man welcomes sinners and eats with them. So Jesus is telling these three stories while sitting down and having a meal with a bunch of sinners, which really upset the Pharisees. They didn't really like that whole concept. They really thought you should only be part of those people that are pure. We don't want anything to do with those sinners. Jesus was kind of big on the whole let's have something to do with the sinners. Right? So the three stories are really meant for those sinners to recognize that they're the ones who are lost. Right? And that they can be found again through Jesus Christ. That He's the Father in the story. That God, the Father, is the Father in the story that welcomes them back and says, it doesn't matter that you were lost to us for a while. You're welcome back in my house anytime. So back to the word prodigal for a minute. If prodigal means foolishly spending money, well, then that may be a term we need to revive in today's society. Right? I know I could use it to describe myself sometimes. And certainly I know others that I could describe with that word. I wasn't thinking of you specifically, but as long as you brought it, no. Right? I've never been so hungry that I was envious of what the pigs got. But the reality is I know there are people out there today who are. And they weren't born homeless. They weren't born hungry. Most homeless people got there through, well, maybe some poor spending habits. Maybe loss of a job. Poor spending habits are easy to come by and hard to break. John Wesley was the founder of the Methodist Church. Actually, it wasn't at that time called the United Methodist Church. It was the Methodist movement. John Wesley was a prolific writer. He printed several volumes of his sermons during his lifetime. Public sermons were either rewritten from ones that he had preached or were written specifically for print. There are 141 sermons in all published by John Wesley. Sermon number 50 is entitled The Use of Money. Now, I'm not going to read you the entire sermon because John Wesley had a tendency to preach for, 4 and 5 hours at a time. Right? In the King's English, I might add, which I can't really do that well. I have a King James Bible. I rarely read it because it's hard for me sometimes to get through some of the words. So I choose a different translation of the Bible because, well, it's easier for me to understand than the King's English. Right? Too many thous and those and thus and these. Right? But I want to read you a little bit from John Wesley's sermon. He was making 3 points. He was very clear on his 3 points that he was making in this sermon. The 3 points were highlighted at the beginning of the sermon. Point number 1. Now, it does use a word, it's hard to say, ought. We don't use ought very often either. We ought to gain all we can gain. But it is certain we ought not to do. We ought not to gain money at the expense of life, nor at the expense of our health. The second point he was trying to make in this sermon, do not throw the precious talent into the sea. And the third, having first gained all you can, and secondly saved all you can, then give all you can. So Wesley is teaching here, the beginning part of this, the first point of this, gain all you can. What Wesley is saying is earning money is not bad. In fact, he's saying that you should earn all you can. Honestly. Later in the same sermon, Wesley says, and I'm paraphrasing him here, but it's close. The love of money is the root of all evil. But the fault does not lie in the money, but in the people that choose to love money instead of loving God. Loving money is evil. Having money is not. It all comes down to what you do with the money. John Wesley spends a significant amount of time on this point in his sermon, making sure that everyone understands that gaining all you can does not mean gaining all you can at all costs. Do not make money off the pain of others. He says, gain all you can by common sense, by using your business all the understanding which God has given you. It is amazing to observe how few do this, how men run on the same dull track with their forefathers. Right? John Wesley lived this philosophy of gain all you can. He actually stood on the corner and begged for money. He earned money by standing on the corner and begging for money so that he could give it to people who were in prison. Right? His second point in the sermon, save all you can. Right? Don't throw it away on the desires of the flesh or waste it trying to impress anyone. Don't give it to your children so that they can throw it away on the easy life. In essence, don't become a prodigal. His third point, give all you can. Last week, Jeff used a clip from Dave Ramsey. And Dave talked about the differences between tithes and offerings. We see tithes are 10%, and they're off the top. Offerings are freely given from surplus. John Wesley's sermon on the use of money focused on offerings freely given from surplus. Both the tithe and the offering come from Scripture. Now there's a tool available to us to accomplish what John Wesley is teaching us. Now, to the best of my knowledge, Mr. Wesley, and he was never called Reverend. I tried to find if he had a title. He was never called Reverend. Mr. Wesley from time to time. John Wesley. But to the best of my knowledge, he never used this tool. But I guarantee you Dave Ramsey uses this tool. Dave Ramsey talks about this tool a lot. Right? The tool is called a budget. Now, when I use that word, it almost always stirs up a particular thought in somebody's head, even sometimes an emotion. Most of it not good. Right? If you've ever worked at a company, you say the word budget, sometimes you think of what was affectionately where I worked at Western Iowa Tech known as budget season. The time when you had to submit a budget. Right? But most commonly when I say the word budget, it's associated with the word no. Right? As in, great idea, but that's not in the budget, so no. Right? No, it's not going to happen. Churches sometimes use it that way. No, it's not in the budget. Can't do it that way. Right? In reality, a budget is just a guess. It's a guess. That's all it is. It's an estimate. It's a plan. Right? It's what you expect to gain, income, and what you expect to spend, expense, and you guess. But at the Kurtzes, we have a budget. Chris is going to die because I'm going to share our budget with you. And she's going to go, what? Right? But I think I got that coming up here on a slide here in a second. Oh, I didn't use any numbers. Right? But we roughly know what we're going to take in. Right? We roughly know what that's going to be. And based on history, we roughly know what we're going to spend. Right? We spent X on insurance last year. We're probably going to spend X on insurance this year. Right? Budget is defined as the amount of money available for spending that is based on a plan on how it is to be spent. The problem is reality is rarely according to plan. Right? Dave Ramsey spends a great deal of time trying to get people to create and then stick to a budget. Financial Peace University is a 9-week program that teaches you how to make a budget, plan for your future, and get out of debt. Several years ago now, we offered that program here at the Ark. And if that is a program you're interested in, we can certainly do it again. If you're personally interested in the Dave Ramsey Financial Peace University and making a budget and getting out of debt, come talk to myself, come talk to Pastor Jeff. Better yet, come talk to our nurture ministry chairperson sitting at the back of the room, right there waving his hand, Dan Wobina. And we'll do that program again. It's a 9-week program. You watch a Dave Ramsey video, he's incredibly entertaining, and he steps you through his program for making a budget, getting out of debt. Right? His famous saying is, you have to live like no one else, so later you can live like no one else. Right? It all starts with a budget, with a guess of what you're going to do. Now, there's more than just guessing, right? The next step is you have to keep track of what you actually do spend your money on, and make sure that you stick to it and that it's in line with your budget. Right? It's called living within our means. My mother used that phrase a lot when I was growing up. You have to live within your means. In essence, spending less than you earn. And I think as Americans, we are generally bad at that concept. Not talking about you or I specifically in any individual, but in general as Americans, we're bad at that concept. Our government's been doing it for years, spending outside of their means. And I don't care if you're Democrat or Republican, they're both doing it. Right? And we ourselves do it a lot. Average credit card debt in America is staggering. Right? We need to spend more time paying attention to our personal budget and less time figuring out if we have the latest iPhone. Right? We saw a glimpse of Dave Ramsey last week. So I'm bringing him back again this week so that you can hear his opinion on pastors preaching on tithing. He has an opinion, trust me.
Malachi is the preeminent tithing scripture. If you ever want to study the tithe, it's all in that one scripture just about. And so if you go look at that thing, it just says, test me in this, says the Lord of hosts. And he lists several things about the tithe. The Lord says, try him out. I'll give you that challenge. Try him out. Tithe for 90 days. If you don't like it, you can always quit. It'll freak you out. Now, a message to all the pastors across that are listening to us right now, quit teaching on tithing. I just did a really good job, but you quit. You need to teach three lessons on getting out of debt and 2 lessons on preaching. On doing 2 lessons on preaching. 3 lessons on getting out of debt and 2 lessons on budgeting for every giving lesson you teach. Because if you'll get people out of debt and get them on a budget, they naturally will give, because people in your congregations love Jesus. And they're not giving not because they don't want to, not because they don't know to. They're not giving because they're broke. And they're having to make a choice between the light bill, feeding their kid, car getting repoed. But if you'll get them out of debt, you'll see your giving go up immediately as a natural byproduct, and you won't even have to mention it. It's a natural thing that happens all the time. So ultimately, God has us to give because he wants to make us over in his image. The tithe is to the local church, and above that is doing cool stuff in Jesus' name.
Dave is firm in his belief that people are naturally givers. That we are made in the image of God, and that image calls us to give. That is a little hard to hear when that message is a little hard to hear when you're on the worship team and you just planned a 6-week sermon series on tithing and stewardship. Especially when Dave says, stop it. Don't do it anymore. Well, you're not off the hook. We're probably not going to quit. Probably going to go all the way to the celebration Sunday on the 6th. Right? But I totally agree with Dave's philosophy. Teaching on budgeting, getting out of debt. We need to do that. We started getting serious about living a budget. We would all have plenty of money to live like no one else. Wouldn't it be nice if you could gain all you can, save all you can, and give all you can? I'd be willing to guess that everyone here has a budget for themselves. I'd also be willing to guess that it's in your head and not on a piece of paper. Right? Most people in their head roughly kind of know what they're going to take in, and they kind of roughly know what they're going to spend. Right? The problem is when you don't have it written down, when you don't have a plan on a piece of paper, well, there are leaks. There are things that you didn't plan on that just happened. Could be I didn't feel like cooking, so we're having pizza. Could be the water heater or the water pump in the car broke down and I have to fix it. There are all kinds of leaks that happen. But when you focus on a written budget, when you start following that plan, you start to see where the leaks are and you start to be able to get a handle on them and you start to be able to control them. When you do, you find that you have extra money. Extra money. There's a concept. Right? I want some of that extra money. In capitalism, we call that extra money profit. That evil word. Right? Profit's what those greedy corporations are trying to get when they charge me exorbitant prices for their goods and services. So fine, we won't call it profit, we'll just call it extra money. Either way, it's really what John Wesley in his sermon was talking about, is gaining some of that extra money. To get extra money through honest work, through saving all you can, so you can give all you can. Now, it shouldn't surprise any of you that the church has a budget. Does that really catch anybody off guard? Really? The church has a budget? I don't think so. The Ark United Methodist Church has a plan on how much it will receive and how much we need to spend. Now, there is a lot of information for churches on how to run a stewardship campaign like we're in the middle of right now. Almost every one of them tells you, do not talk about the budget during the stewardship campaign. Right? Somehow we're to pretend that there's not a business side to the work of the local church. Well, just for your information, that's not true. There is. The lights don't come on for free. And we weren't given this building. And if you're interested in what the details of the church budget looks like, well, I'm going to have a copy for you at the back of the room. When you leave, pick one up. There's no secret about it. It's there. Right? I'm not going to talk about it in detail here. Jeff wanted me to go through it line by line, but I told him that would be just boring. So pick up a copy on your way out. If you got any questions, ask us about it. That's fine. Right? I made you a copy on the copier that we lease. Right? I do know, however, why they tell you not to talk about the budget. Because the fear is that people will have a tendency to give enough to cover the budget and no more. We've covered your budget. You should be happy. Right? Plus, giving to a budget is kind of like paying a bill. Do you really like to pay the bill? No, you do it, but it's distasteful. Right? Giving to a budget it doesn't have the same feeling as giving to helping somebody in need. Right? That same feeling as helping out somebody who needs something to eat. But without some basic expenses and a means to pay them, the church doesn't exist. So the budget's there. Our church budget's pretty lean. It's the minimum. The minimum that we need to survive as a church and to continue to do God's work in our community. Don't get me wrong. We're not down to our last penny. And frankly, we've been in a lot worse shape than we are right now. But we need to set a new goal. Set a new goal for the body of Christ. If our church is to succeed and not just simply exist, we need to set a new goal. We need to not be afraid to recognize that there's a budget and start planning to get us some extra money so we can do more than what the budget calls us to do. Our budget is typical of many churches. In fact, I saw a survey online that had some statistics, and our budget is pretty much right on. Right? When you look at where our money goes, too much of it goes to the worship space and keeping the lights on, and not enough of it goes to feeding the homeless. That's just the honest truth. We can do better. The Ark United Methodist Church can do better. I read a story about a church who took on a radical budget idea. And I want to challenge us. I want to challenge our church to take on that same radical idea. Now, the goal of this church was to spend half of their budget on ministries outside of the church. Now, 50% is a lot, right? When you consider the average church spends less than 5% on those same activities today. 50% of the church budget spent outside of here. Not for us, for them. When this church did that, the impact on their community was dramatic and immediate. I think we can do the same thing. It's a big challenge. It's a huge challenge. Right? My goal is to increase the ARC budget so that we can take 50% of our income, 50% of our budget, and spend it outside of the church. Now, the reality is the rent's not going to go down and the lights aren't going to get cheaper. So we have to do all of that and not raise our expenses at all. Right? In real numbers, right now our budget, when you look at it, when you pick one up to take it home, our budget is a little over $85,000 a year. Right? That's our budget. We currently spend right around 3% outside of here. I want to change that 3% to 50%. Right? That's an increase of a little over $33,000 in giving annually. Gene right now is looking at me going, yeah, you're right. It's not going to happen. But it can happen. It can if we decide to make a difference. Right? In reality, it's a stretch, but it's doable. And remember, giving really is all about us and not about where we're giving it to. Before our last song today, we will be handing out the estimate of giving cards. This is part of the stewardship process that we're going to take you through. We ask that you take this card home and that you pray about it. And you pray about the Ark United Methodist Church. You pray about your impact your giving has on you. Pray about how your impact and what it has on our community. If you want to start working on a personal budget, now's a great time to get started. If you're in debt and don't know how to get out, come talk to Jeff or Dan or I, and we'll bring back that 9-week series from Dave Ramsey. I took it when we did it the first time. It was fantastic. Right? We'll bring that back. If you're interested in the church budget, there's one in the back. But the bottom line is don't be a prodigal. Earn all you can. Save all you can. So you can give all you can. Amen.